Welcome back to ENGL540. In the past lectures, we've had an overview of the grammar of English, the dimensions, and the final point was the way in which we can use the function rank matrix to survey all the systems available for constructing meanings as wordings in the grammar of English, intersecting the spectrum of metafunction and the rank scale. So that's the background. We now have an overview of the total resources. So we're in a position to do a systematic survey of the resources metafunction by metafunction, staying at clause rank. So now we will start with an overview of the textual grammar of the clause as message. The contents of this stage of today's lecture is first a little quick recap, just reminding ourselves of metafunction and the function rank matrix. Then starting in on the textual grammar of the clause's message. So in deploying functional grammar, a textbook, that's chapter 2, and the key system here is a system of theme, a system for allocated different textual statuses to the clause, highlighting highlighting part of the clause's theme, the orientation to the rest of the clause's message. Then the textual significance of beginnings in general, so textual beginnings as ways into a text at different scales. We'll ask how far the theme extends into the clause, and that would be an occasion to talk about metafunctional phases of the theme as an orientation to the textual, the interpersonal, and the experiential topical environment of the clause. So in terms of recap, we've discussed the spectrum of metafunction and related that to the function rank matrix. Behind this then lies the notion that if we do a functional analysis using the description of the grammar, that is immediately multifunctional. It's dispersed according to the different metafunctions of language. So functional analysis of any text, of any discourse in lexicogrammatical terms means a textual analysis, an interpersonal analysis, an ideational analysis. And as I've already hinted at, that then splits into experiential analysis within the clause and logical analysis, looking at how clauses are linked together into chains or series of clauses. So a functional analysis of the clause as a textual point of view, as a message, interpersonal point of view, as a move in dialogue, so quantum of interaction. Experiential analysis, the clause as a figure, so a quantum of change in our experience and flow events. And finally, if we look at the logic analysis, clauses combining, clauses as sequences. But now we'll focus on the textual analysis, looking at the clause as message. And by way of reminder, I showed this figure earlier in our presentations, making the point that if you look at the clause from a semantic point of view, it is simultaneously a message, a move, a figure. And what the grammar of the clause does is, as it were, weave these together or unify them into one grammatical structure where you can still see quite transparently the different metafunctional contributions. So that's part of the power of a modern scientific functional grammar analysis and description. So any element of the clause, prepositional phrase, a nominal group, will, as it were, have a role to play textually, interpersonally, and experientially. So continuing to focus on the clause's message, the textual focus. And this is the function rank matrix that we ended up with last time. So we can locate ourselves anywhere within the matrix, but now we're concerned with the intersection of textual resources at clause rank. So this is the cell that we will focus on. But anytime we can move around, we can see what are the relationships to, say, the interpersonal cell, the grammar of mood in relation to the grammar of theme, or the grammar of theme in relation to the grammar of transitivity within the experiential column. We talk about the textual clause grammar. The most important system is the system of theme. But there are other related systems, somewhat variable across languages, and one is voice, which can serve to adjust the nature of the unmarked or default theme relative to other perspectives on the clause. And we'll also have something to say about conjunction, the textual resources for, as it were, providing hints or indications or clues as to how the clause as a message relates to the text, to the discourse that it emerges from. Next in our survey will be the interpersonal clause grammar, mood, and associated systems. And then finally, staying within the clause, the experiential clause grammar, the system of transitivity. So any analysis of a clause will comprise not only the classes, clauses, groups, nominal, adverbial, verbal, phrases, prepositional, not only the anatomy of the clause, as I put it before, but also the physiology. So we will bring out the way that these elements of the clause function textually, as theme or rime, interpersonally as a subject or complement, and experientially as a process or actor or goal. That is what I characterize as slotting in or splicing in a function structure between the overall organization of the clause and the units that it consists of. So still, today we will focus, and the next couple of weeks, we will focus on the organization of the clause as a message, the organization into theme plus rime. And that is indeed precisely what we understand by the textual grammar of the clause as a message, the focus on the system of theme. So that's at clause rank in the textual column. And I've repeated this a few times now because I think it's very important that we should always know where we're located in our investigation, our survey, our scanning of the grammar. So it shouldn't be the case that the grammar is simply an accumulation, a list of fragments of information about it. It should actually bring out the way these are interrelated and how they complement one another in the construction of different kinds of meaning in the grammar. In terms of our textbook, Deploying Functional Grammar DFG, the reading is chapter 2. You have the usual organization. Pay attention to, as you move into this chapter, the characterization of theme. And like the other core chapters in the book, you could say this is actually a macro theme about the whole chapter. So it starts out saying the system of theme belongs to the textual metafunction of the language. It is concerned with the organization of information within individual clauses and, through this, the organization of the larger text. Thus, the following versions of the same clause-sized piece of information embody alternative theme choices. And on it goes. So that is precisely an orientation to the whole set of resources known as the system of theme in the grammar. We've already seen at different points that these choices, these textual choices, are significant in terms of beginnings. Beginnings are way into texts, paragraph, clauses and messages. But interestingly, we can gain further understanding by thinking about the choice of beginnings also for other kinds of constructs. So if we were on campus at PolyU approaching the Y core, then you can think about how do you approach the Y core? Well, even in buildings, you have, as it were, a gateway in, an orientation from the outside to the inside. And that's what I'm trying to reflect in this photograph. So you move to the Y core and you go through the entrance. And the entrance then provides you with a system where you can know how to navigate through the building. So the entrance serves as your point of departure for moving through the building. You can say this is quite analogous to the beginning of a text, of a paragraph, of a clause. It gives you expectations as to where you can head, and it also helps you very often link back to where you came from. But in the grammar then, this is the clause as message. Again, I come back to this point that beginnings are significant on all scales. So as a general principle, a general thematic principle in English and other languages too, that beginnings are a natural way of indicating, marking, signaling the orientation to what's to come. And consequently, it's hardly surprising that beginnings are significant textually as a kind of prominence in orientation at different scales. So for whole texts are beginnings, orienting us to the nature of the text. So when we begin a text, we soon have a sense of, oh, maybe this is a story with a placement, or maybe this is an advertisement, try and grab our attention. So whole texts have beginnings that are thematically significant. Paragraphs within text. So paragraphs making up text have beginnings, and in traditional composition rhetoric, they are often called topic sentences. And then finally, where we're focusing really today with the grammar of the clauses and messages realized by clauses. So messages make up paragraphs, and they have their beginnings of thematic significance. Now, one way you can explore this, just to get a sense of it, is you cut and paste, as it were, from a number of different texts, and you look at the beginnings of these different texts, and you ask yourself, do you have a sense of what to expect? Does the beginning provide you with the context for interpreting the rest of the text? Let's try a few examples. So here's the beginning of one text, and it says, "High in the mountains lived the daughter of a chief. Her name was Raida, and her tribe was the Tainos." Now, what do you expect, having started in on the text like this? So you could say this is the beginning of the whole text, a macro theme for the text. What do you expect? Do you expect a political speech, an advertisement? Hardly. This is a very traditional beginning of a folk tale. What about the following? The atmosphere. The earth holds an ocean of air called the atmosphere. The atmosphere is a mixture of gases that protect the living things from the dangerous radiation of sunlight, which holds some of the sun's warmth. The atmosphere contains oxygen, which many living things need to live. What do you expect now? What kind of text do you think we've embarked on? It's not a story, it's not a tale. It is very likely the kind of text that has been characterized as a taxonomic report. Try a couple of more beginnings. So the beginning of another text. It says, "China is one of the world's 4 ancient civilizations. Here we give a concise overview of more than 5,000 years of Chinese history, including the Great Wall and the 4 great inventions of ancient China." Do you know what they were? Well, this is fairly explicit in terms of giving us an orientation into the text. So what we expect here is not a fictional story, not a taxonomic report, not an explanation, but some form of historical recount. And finally, I won't read this because it's a bit longer, China geography. So located in Southwest Asia, etc., etc. This beginning, what does it give us? Well, it gives us a sense that we can expect a text that is like a map, what we might call a topographic report or a verbal map. And that's the principle with beginnings of text in general, that they set up expectations, so they help us as listeners, as readers. They frame us for going on with our process of constructing meanings out of the text that we're reading or listening to. Here's one more example. This is from the beginning of a folktale, what would be called a placement and orientation in a traditional tale, and it serves as a macro theme for the whole text. So it starts out: pyramids, palaces, and temples of stone stand silent and abandoned, hidden by dense rainforest. But that was not always so. Long, long ago, great cities built by the Mayan people were centers of activity. In one of those cities, one whose name has long been forgotten, there lived an old halak unik, or chief. He had no son to succeed him. Since he had no son to succeed him, he knew that his younger brother, Chiroma, would one day take his place. But the chief's wife wanted a child. Each day she prayed with all her heart. So that's sort of setting up what is to follow. We have an orientation, a placement for the story that's to follow. And then, and that's significant, how do we break? Well, the very next paragraph starts like this. And one day. So it resets the time from habitual, general time to one specific time. In terms of that particular clause, and one day her prayers were answered, the theme is a circumstance of time, and it makes a temporal shift. The beginning of a new stage in the story. In fact, the initiating event in a chain of events. So we've gone from the placement, we're talking about habitual activities, characteristics, and so on, to the start of what turns out to be a chain of events. So if we can pull back, we see that this folktale starts with a placement in terms of the context of narrative, and then there is a clear mark with "and one day" when it moves to the next stage of storytelling, that of telling of a number of episodes, the initiating one. And again, if we focus on the textual orientation given by the text, then we move from macro theme into the text. And that, of course, highlights the important point that there's always a choice. There's always the question of how do we choose a theme? What are the candidates? And what's the motivation for choosing one candidate over another candidate? Let's return to this one that was the initiating event in a series of events. One day her prayers were answered. So what's chosen as theme here is one day, a time expression. But of course there are alternative possibilities. So the storyteller could have chosen another candidate, and he or she could have said, her prayers were answered one day. So there is a choice. And the interesting question then is one choice better motivated than the other? And the answer is yes. Because it's the first version, one day her prayers was answered, that gives us this kind of temporal shift from the general habitual activities of her praying to one particular day. And you would expect in stories, in recounts, that a sequence in time is in fact important in staging the chronology of events. But this is typical. So in another point in this early part of the folktale, she says she gave birth to a son. The theme here is she, and the rest is a non-theme, reem. But the storyteller could have chosen to say, for example, to a son she gave birth. And you could reason about this again, and you can say, what's the significance of choosing she rather than to son as theme? And how is it motivated in its particular environment in the text? What we're getting here is that the theme both reflects and constructs the development of the text, what's been called the method of development. And if you were to choose to a son, I would have other implications than she. Yet one more example from the same text. The child was born on the 13th of the month. That's absolutely one possible thematic choice. The child as theme. But alternatively, we could have had, for example, the time expression. On the 13th of the month, the child was born. So these would be alternatives in the telling of the story from a textual point of view. The actual beginning of the initiating events is like this, right? And one day her prayers were answered. She gave birth to a son. The child was born on the 13th day of the month, a lucky day, for the number reminded the Mayan people of their 13 heavens. Now you could imagine the somewhat scrambled version of this paragraph would read as follows. And her prayers were answered one day. To a son she gave birth. On the 13th day of the month, a lucky day, the child was born. For of the 13 heavens, the number reminded the Mayan people. It's not that it's impossible, it's not that it's ungrammatical, but it's much less well adapted to the development of the narrative of the story. And that's one key aspect of the choice of theme. It sort of enables speakers and writers to adapt clauses and messages to the environment from which they emerge. So if you wanted to look at this, you could look at the spread in this picture book, and you can also, as an excursion as it were, ask how do these text choices relate to the illustrations? What's the nature of the relationship? What meanings get expressed in the text and in the illustrations? So stop for breath for 1 second. What we've said then is theme has a function. There's a function within the textual grammar. So typically functions within textual grammar have to do with different kinds of prominence, assigning some kind of status to an element that will help the listener or the reader process the messages presented to him or her by the speaker or writer. The function of theme is one of orientation or setting up a local context or guiding the listener, the reader, to the point of departure for his or her interpretation of the message. But that is distinct from and must be kept distinct from the way it's realized, the way it is signaled, coded, marked. So in terms of function, the theme is, let's say, an orientation to or a point of departure from the discursive environment that clauses as messages emerge from. But this environment is at the same time textual, interpersonal, experiential. What about the realization? How is it signaled? How is it marked? Well, by first position in the clause. And that seems natural enough. As I said, it's an iconic way of realizing the status of the theme. But it does raise the question, how far into the clause does the first position reach? Now, in terms of the environments then that the clause operates in, textually, in terms of choice of theme, all three guises of the clause are relevant. So the clause as a message, there is a potential for having a textual theme, typically a conjunction like meanwhile, therefore, for example, in other words, besides, etc. So the environment of the clause as a message marked explicitly by conjunction given the status of theme. But at the same time the clause is a move, so you may have an interpersonal theme, something that relates to its interpersonal status and the way it emerges interpersonally from the environment in which it is being constructed. And finally, a clause is also a figure, an experiential representation, and in this guise it will have a topical theme. Some aspects of its representation may be given the status of theme, participant, circumstance, or process. So we're taking a step back and we're saying the theme has a contextualizing contribution, but precisely because the clause is simultaneously a message, a move, and a figure, it may be contextualized not only as one, but as two or all three of them. So it may be contextualized as a message, as a move, and as a figure. So we come back then to the question of how far does a theme extend? And here is a principle that Michael Halliday articulated when he did the basic research into this area of the grammar and had studied many naturally occurring texts. And it goes something like this. The theme of a clause extends up to the first element that has a function in transitivity. What does this mean? Well, it has a function in the clause as a figure. So as a function as a participant, circumstance, a process. And here is how he characterizes it in one of the readings you have, but it's a voluntary, optional reading from his chapter called Dimensions of Discourse Analysis Grammar. He says, the theme is a speaker's point of departure for the clause. It is realized in English by position in the sequence. Thematic elements are put first. Hence the thematic structure of the clause is theme followed by rime. Each of the three metafunctional components of the content plane, ideational, interpersonal, textual, may contribute thematic material. The textual theme is some combination of continuative, oh, well, conjunctive, then, if, or relative, that which. The interpersonal theme is modality, perhaps interrogative mood marker, like a WH element or finite verbal auxiliary, or vocative. The topical theme is any element functioning in the transitivity structure of the clause. The typical sequence then is textual, followed by interpersonal, followed by topical phase of the theme. And the theme, in any case, ends with a topical element. In other words, the theme of a clause extends up to the first element that has a function in transitivity and includes that element. So that's the general principle about the thematic packaging of the clause, as it were, in English. Precisely that it allows us to include different phases, different metafunctional phases in the theme, but always ending up with the experiential phase, what we call the topical theme. So if you ask about the ways in which the system of theme contextualizes a clause, you can say it allows it metafunction by metafunction. So you pays attention to the discursive environment, how the clause as a message emerges from previous discourse, to the interpersonal environment in relation to the addressee, stands in relation to the addressee, identity of the addressee, and so on, expected speech function. And finally, an experiential orientation, orienting participant, circumstance, or process relative to the construction of experience that's been built up before. And let me illustrate this with a slightly doctored example with what you might say is a maximally extended theme, starting with the textual, however, interpersonal, actually two steps, frankly, my dear, and topical. So in this example, however, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. The theme extends up to and includes the first element in the transitivity structure, participant I, and is preceded then by a textual phase, however, and by an interpersonal phase, frankly, my dear. And we can summarize this as follows. We say for any clause, you have a choice. Would you like or wouldn't you like a textual theme? So you don't have to have a textual theme, but there is always the option of having a textual theme. The plus textual theme means then including something, a continuative or conjunction, that explicitly relates the clause to the text environment that it emerges from. Similarly for interpersonal theme, you may or may not have an interpersonal theme, not obligatory, but if you do, that means giving prominence to some aspect of the interpersonal meaning of the clause, setting it up as an orientation to what's to follow. So for example here, frankly, an expression of veracity, the thematic orientation is I'm giving you a message and whatever follows I subscribe to. It's true. Finally then you come to the topical theme. Here you also have a choice, but you haven't got a choice to opt out. The choice is rather what kind of topical theme you get, an unmarked theme or a marked theme. We'll talk more about this. So a minimal thematic version of this would be I don't give a damn, frankly, my dear, however. Or with just a textual theme, however, don't give a damn, my dear. Or with just an interpersonal theme, with suspended, however, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, however. So all these are possible, but they mean different things, textually speaking. Now, let me give you a little time to relax and listen to other people's voices. Let me give you a clip from the original version of this clause, which is simply, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn."
Fred, please don't say that. Fred, I'm so sorry. Fred, please don't. I'm so sorry for everything. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything.
You're such a child. My darling, you're such a child. You think that by saying I'm sorry, all the past can be corrected? Yes. Take my handkerchief. Never take my handkerchief. Never in any crisis of your life have I known you to have a handkerchief.
Red, where are you going? Red, where are you going? Please.
I'm going to Charleston. Back where I belong.
Please take me with you.
I'm through with everything here. No. I'm through with everything here. I want to see if somewhere I want peace. I want to see if somewhere there isn't something left in life of charm and grace.
No. I only know that
You know what I'm talking about?
No. I only know that I love you.
That's your misfortune.
Where shall I go? What shall I
I
do?
don't give a damn. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
So you can see how much interpersonal punch can be packed into the choice of the interpersonal phase of the theme. Next, then, we will continue with the consideration of theme choice, and we will look at themes selected according to the method of development of a text.